Hello everyone, in today's video we will create a character selection screen. We'll have a choice between a male and female character and add a confirmation pop-up as well. Character selection is something we see more and more in games, especially the choice between different genders is becoming something of a standard. For this tutorial I am using the UI components module to display 3D characters in the UI, and I'll be using Synty models as an example. This will obviously work with whatever character models you have. In order to do this, we will need Unity, Game Creator, and the optional UI Components module if you want interactable 3D models. Before we start, I would of course like to thank all of my Patreon supporters for the absolutely amazing support. So for this tutorial, I'm using a default scene here. Nothing needs to be set up except for a player. Now this player doesn't even need to have anything set up. If you already have one that has loads of things set up, that works fine as well, but it could just be a completely fresh new default player. Doesn't really matter. Now I'm going to go over sorting priorities for user interfaces as well. So if we look at our player UI, if you've seen that and if you have one yourself, this has a sort order of 1. So that basically means priorities. Now this is important to remember because if we don't want to turn existing UIs on and off every time we use something else, we can just change sorting orders. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to create an empty, and this will be, well, let's just call it character selection. Everything we're doing related to the character selection will be grouped into this one. So once we're done with it, we can simply disable this and none of it will be affecting our scene anymore. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So we have character selection here. What we're going to do with this is on start, I'm going to do 2 things. So let's add a trigger. On start, let's add the actions here just to make it a bit easier. There's only 2 of them. And we're going to change the time scale, so time scale to 0. So we're going to pause the game while the character selection is going on when it's happening. The next step is something you do not need to do if you're not using HDRP. Might be something you need to do with URP as well. Not entirely sure, I haven't used URP. But unfortunately for HDRP, I need to do this. So I'm using a black background and honestly it just becomes messy with the directional light on. So on start, I'm going to turn off my directional light. Now this is just really want to specify here, this is related to HDRP. So if you're not using HDRP, I'm pretty sure you can completely skip this step. Now next up I'm going to drag in 2 characters. So I'm using Synty characters here. Doesn't really matter what characters you're using. I'm using Synty because there's a clear male-female version of the same type of character. That's literally the reason I'm using it. So yeah, so dragging those in. Now these do not have a character controller, which means they'll be in their, well, you know, default T-pose. That's not something I want. I want them to, well, look animated. So what I'm going to do, real simple, and yes, obviously you could set up interesting animations to make it look a lot better. I'm simply going to use the default locomotion here. Now they won't need to do anything. This is simply so they won't be in their T-pose while in the UI, and they'll look a bit more normal. So yeah, that's literally the reason. Now let's add a UI. So this will be our canvas. Now remember that sorting order. Now I want to make sure that my character selection UI will be in front of the existing UI, so like the player UI, etc. So don't want to turn these off, that's not necessary. So I'm simply going to change the sort order. Now it was the player UI had a sort order of 1, so if this needs to be take priority, basically, it needs to be 2. Really simple. I'm going to scale with screen size here. This is a personal preference. I'm going for 1080p, but you can change this to something else if you prefer. Now let's rename this to selection UI, just to be clear what we're doing here. There we go. And our selection UI will, well, basically house everything we will need here. So it will have everything related to the character actual selection. So I'm going to add a image, which will be our background. Let's switch to 2D view. And we're going to drag this out. Now, the UI you saw behind that, the player UI, is no longer visible. Now, if I would change this sort order to 0, you'd see the player UI actually taking priority, so being on top of this. So that's why we're changing the sort order. Now let's rename this to background. There we go. I'm going with black here. And yeah, that looks incredibly weird. That's because of HDRP. So that's why I turned off that directional light. Now I'm going to manually do that just for creating this UI and then turn it back on. So there we go. We have our black background. I'm going to add some text here. And this will be something we'll need to use as well. So I'm already going to add a trigger for onstart, and it will house some actions. But we're going to set those up later because we need to create a couple of other things first. So let's add our text here. You can even make that part of the background, that's fine. So text, and it will be white text. Character selection, there we go. Perfect, in the middle. Let's make the text a bit bigger, and there we go. I'm not trying to design anything beautiful here, it's more about the content, not about the look. So that's part of the background, so that's completely fine. So we're going to add a panel here. So panel, this will be our character panel. There we go. This doesn't need a background, so I'm just going to make it transparent. And well, let's actually give it some color so we can properly resize it first and actually see what we're doing. So there we go. Yeah, it's about right. Let's make this transparent now. And no, not yet. I'm going back and forth with this. I'll do that a bit later. In this panel, we're going to add 2 raw images. So these raw images will be displaying our characters. So about here is fine. Yeah, seems about right. Cool. Duplicate this one. And there we have it. 2 raw images. Now these will display our 3D models, so we don't actually need to do anything with these right now. We don't need to set anything up here. We can just leave them as is. Now I'm going to add a text here as well. And this will have to be white. Now the background is by default white, so it's a bit weird, but let's just make sure I can see what I'm doing here. Male, There we go. To make this white, I'm going to duplicate this text. I'm going to drag it in the middle here. And this will be female. There we go. So that's it really for the actual panel. Don't need to do anything here. And what we're going to do now is, let's keep this open. And I see I put these on the background, so let's actually remove that, make it clean. Going to add everything here. There we go. So trigger, onstart, actions, drag these in, and we're going to display 3D model on canvas. There we go. Now these need raw images. So I'm going to do this one once, and then I'm going to duplicate it for the other one. It's just easier to set up the first one like that. I'm going to drag in our character. Now this needs a layer to recognize it. So this will be companion AI, which means these need the companion AI layer. Now keep in mind, this does not affect your player character. This is simply for the UI. So it doesn't matter that we're changing the layer here. Cool. Now these will be some default values that we need to mess a bit with. So I'm going to enter the values that work fine for me, but again, keep in mind it, if you want to mess with this, that's completely fine. I'm going to do a point light here, and yeah. So I'm going to keep it exactly like this. This is something that works for me. But again, if you're not using HDRP and you're using URP or the default renderer, just keep in mind you might have to play a bit with these values. Cool. See, I'm not sure if I'm pretty sure I had to do it like this. I'm going to try this out. Now the drag speed, I'm going to keep it pretty low. You could also have auto rotate on, so it rotates the characters. Let's do that actually. That's pretty interesting. Cool. So that's the first one set up. So it's using that raw image. Now that we've done that, I'm going to duplicate it. Going to drag in the other raw image. There we go. And we're going to select our female character. And that's it. That way we don't have to set up all of these values again. Now the characters will be displayed, so let's give this a go and see what it looks like. Cool. So our characters are visible, they're working, they're auto-rotating. Obviously I still need to disable this panel, the background of it at least. So I'm going to do that, but this is pretty cool. Auto-rotate is actually a lot more interesting. So that's nice. So let's remove that background for the panel and everything will be black. Perfect. Now, next up, what we're going to do is we're going to set up the buttons. Now, I'm doing it this way that we actually have a confirmation as well. So I wanted to make sure that we could, once we selected our choice, we could go back and select the other choice if we wanted to. Something you have by default in most games, so I thought it would be pretty interesting to do that. So for this one, we're going to create a new button, but usually I go to UI and then button, where we need to take some extra steps to make them work for Game Creator. This time I'm actually going to use the UI button from Game Creator itself. This has action support already set up, so we don't need to take any extra steps. Actually, it makes things a bit easier. Now, if you're wondering why I never did that before, it's because I honestly never looked at it before. so I didn't really check the UI options that Game Creator had by default. So we have our character here, our button here. Now this is going to rename this to select male. Let's change the text. I'm just going to do select here, so the text doesn't need to say male. If you can't see that's male, that's, well, it is. So yeah, cool. We have our select option here. Now yeah, it's going to make it semi-transparent. I'm not going to mess too much with the color options here for selection. It's fine. Just make this a bit lighter by default and we're good. So that's select male. I'm going to add the actions before we actually mess around with creating the other one. So this will set active 2 items, and these are 2 items we still need to create. So let's do that first before we go ahead and duplicate this. So I'm going to create a new image here. There we go. Change the color of this image a bit darker. And this will be our confirmation. Now if you want to make this prettier and add animations to this, obviously go ahead. Just going to keep it simple here. So we have our image. This will be our confirmation. Pop up. There we go. Let's add some text to this. And this text will simply ask if we're sure. So, are you sure? Change overflow here, it's better. Are you sure? Yeah. Cool. And drag that a bit lower. And this will have, our confirmation will have 2 buttons, 3 buttons actually. So let's drag those in. So I'm actually going to simply duplicate this one. Already selected, made up our text, just a bit easier. So I'm going to rename this to male confirm. Now it's important that you name these because we'll be needing to, we'll do a couple of actions with these as well. So it's just easier this way. So male confirm, I'm going to do yes here. There we go. Let's drag this here. Now we can mess around with the colors of these buttons a bit. So yeah, I could just leave it like this really, that's fine. And then once we highlight, we're going to use a different color. So yes, going to remove these actions and we're going to add some new actions. Now this will be the confirmation that we want to select the male character. So this is, I'm pretty sure, well, the most important part actually of what the character selection will do, and it's actually also one of the easiest one. So we're going to make sure that we set our time scale back to 1 first. We need to do that, otherwise if you have this later after a wait, for example, it won't work. So time needs to reset. Then we're going to go to character and we're going to do character model. There we go, player, and going to drag in our male character here. I'm going to add a small weight. I'm going to do 0.5, so really low. And again, time scale needs to be before the weight. You know, you can't wait if there's no time, basically. we're going to set inactive our entire character selection group. So the entire group is going to be disactivated. That's why I wanted to make sure everything was a part of this one. And in my case, I need to make sure that our directional light is on. And again, this is simply because I'm using HDRP. Most likely you won't have to do this, but if you're using a render pipeline, there's a chance you might have to do this if you're using black backgrounds. Otherwise it will, well, it just looks weird. So there we have it. These are all the actions we need to set up. Now let's duplicate this one and let's call it female confirm. There we go. It's going to be in the exact same place, so no difference. All you need to change here is make sure you drag in the female character model, and that's it. So cool. And then we need one last one, so let's duplicate this one again, and we're going to drag it here, about here, and this will be no. So this is basically saying no, I don't want to do that. What we're doing with no is, let's remove all of these actions. There we go. We're going to disable the pop-up, and we're going to disable male confirm and female confirm. Now let's just call this no, go back, or just no confirm, maybe that's better. There we go. Now, reason we're deactivating these is because by default they are not active, so let's deactivate them. And our select male is actually the one that activates this option, so male confirm and our confirmation pop-up. So it's not just confirmation pop-up that needs to be deactivated by default, it's also these two buttons, because whatever button we select, so here I'm going to do a select female, going to drag this here, there we go, and this will enable the female confirm button. So that's the way we're, well, basically tricking it with the confirmation. Is whenever you select this one, it will have the confirmation yes or no. The yes or no confirmation is actually the one that does all of the actions, so it's not actually the select here. And yeah, that's something you need to do if you want to have a confirmation screen. And I definitely recommend having a confirmation pop-up. Obviously make it look prettier than what I did, but it's just better to give the player the option to still change their mind, which is something most people will do when selecting a character. So pretty cool. I'm pretty sure this is all we need to do. So let's give this a try, and if we forgot something, we'll just change it. So I'm going to collapse all of these. I'm even going to turn this back on, which is fine now. Cool. And we can hit play. Cool. So we have our characters, they're rotating by default, which is pretty cool. Maybe black was a bit exaggerated, but oh well, it's fine. Now they auto rotate, but oh yeah, they auto rotate. It's actually better. I see select isn't centered, so that's something I need to change, but that's fine. So we're selecting this one, we get the pop-up, are you sure? Yes, no. Let's make no red as well. I select no, and we go back to this screen. Now, if I'm sure, I select yes, and we are back. Now, as you can see, everything is black, so something didn't go well here, so I forgot to do something. So let's have a look. So first thing we'll do is on the no confirm, we're going to turn that to red. So when we highlight no, it will be red. It's a bit better than blue, in all honesty. Then next up, what we need to do is when we confirm this, we need to make sure our directional light is actually on. And as we can see here, I forgot to toggle on. So really simple, small mistake. Now, pretty sure the select wasn't properly centered, which is a bit strange because it was a duplicate of the other one. So I'm not entirely sure what the reason for that is. I'm just going to cheat and do this. Cool. So let's give this another go and just make sure everything is turned off. Perfect. Now this might be a bit too black, and the characters actually use black as well, so maybe it wasn't the best choice of a background, but that's fine. You can change all of the background colors for everything, obviously. So we have our characters. I'm going to select fimo in this case. I'm not sure. No, I want to select the male character and I'm going to do yes. Then our scene starts and we have our character. Perfect. All set up. Now going to hit play again and we're going to select the fimo in this case just to make sure it all works properly. Cool, so we're selecting the fimo option. Are you sure? Yes. And we're launching and we have our fimo character. So that's it really. Nothing all too exciting, but definitely something really cool. Now personally, for my own project, I'm only using a selection based on gender. If by default you want to be able to select a lot more than just, male, female, and add a lot of different options like changing haircuts, clothes, all in the default character selection, that's something you can do, well, pretty much the same way. You just need to make sure that your character actually has different options. So, different haircuts, etc., which you can select between. I'm going to cover that in a different one. So in my own project, I have a barber where you can just change haircuts and all of that stuff. And that's where I'll cover, customizing the character a bit. But here we have it, a character selection. Pretty cool, pretty happy with the result. So hope you liked this. If you did, please hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.